Now we pick up and we're going to look a little bit more in greater detail with the heart itself. It is considered to be a double pump organ, and that's because you have the heart pumping blood into two separate sets of vessels, or we consider these to be circuits. So we know that functionally you have the right and the left side of the heart that function together. So the right atrium, right ventricle function in one circuit, and then the left atrium and left ventricle in the other circuit. So notice the right side of the heart is usually colored in blue in a lot of the colored diagrams. That's because it's considered to be the pulmonary circuit. You have deoxygenated blood that has just arrived in the right atrium. The right ventricle then pumps it into the pulmonary trunk, and it takes it to the lungs to pick up oxygen and to have that diffusion exchange within the alveolar sacs of the lung tissue. So the vessels that lead to and within the lungs are collectively called the pulmonary circuit. Here you have pulmonary arteries within the pulmonary circuit. They deliver oxygen poor and carbon dioxide rich or deoxygenated blood for the lungs to load and unload the oxygen and the carbon dioxide. So notice pulmonary arteries, we just said previously that arteries carry blood away from the heart. We usually know that arteries have oxygenated blood, so here's an exception. The pulmonary arteries and the pulmonary veins are exceptions to the previous rule. So they're the only arteries that carry blue or deoxygenated blood, the pulmonary arteries. Within the lungs, once the blood arrives there, there's going to be gas exchange between the alveoli I mentioned, which are the air sacs that line both sets of lungs, and you have the pulmonary circuit where you have pulmonary capillaries that are associated with each single alveolus within the lungs. And then you have the pulmonary veins that bring the oxygen-rich or oxygenated blood back to the left side of the heart. So these are your pulmonary veins that are an exception. We said veins carry blood to the heart, so they do abide by that rule, but usually veins carry deoxygenated blood. So the exception is that pulmonary veins are the only veins that carry oxygenated blood back to the left side of the heart. So if you notice with the pulmonary circuit, there you have at step 1 the deoxygenated blood is coming in the superior and inferior vena cava into the right atrium. It goes through valves into the right ventricle, and then in step 2 the pulmonary trunk delivers using the pulmonary arteries this deoxygenated blood to the pulmonary capillaries. There's exchange of the oxygen and the carbon dioxide, and then pulmonary arteries then, or the pulmonary veins from the lungs, the pulmonary veins now have red or oxygenated blood, bringing it back to the left side of the heart, delivering it to the left atrium, through the valve into the left ventricle, and then of course that's pumped up into the aorta. So we'll get through the actual steps of blood flow later on, but right now we're trying to consider the right side of the heart being the blue side, the pulmonary circuit, and then of course that leaves the left side to be the systemic pump. So here we've said the oxygenated blood from the lungs is now returning using pulmonary veins, and again these are the exception to veins. Once it's in the left side, it will be pumped into vessels that are going to serve all of the tissues. So we consider that to be collectively the systemic circuit. So with this, the oxygenated blood gets into the aorta. The aorta delivers it to the smaller vessels, and then eventually the smallest of the blood vessels, which are the systemic capillaries, will have gas exchange with the tissue. So here it's in reverse. You have oxygen that diffuses from the blood into the tissues, so opposite from the lungs, and the carbon dioxide diffuses from the tissues back into the blood. So it's opposite of what happens in the lungs. The blood also delivers nutrients, picks up the waste products that now need to be excreted from the body, hormones that needed to be distributed to their target cells throughout the body. Now we consider the blood to be deoxygenated as it begins to leave the tissues. So the venous portion of the systemic circuit now delivers, like we said, veins deliver blood back to the right side of the heart, and it's pumped back into the pulmonary circuit, and it continues the cycle over and over and over again with every heartbeat. So if you analyze the systemic circuit, we said it's the left side of the heart. We consider it to be the red side in color-coded figures. So we said the oxygenated blood arriving from the lungs into the left side of the heart. The left atrium, the left ventricle pumps it out into the tissues, and then of course at the tissues you have the exchange of the oxygen, the carbon dioxide, nutrients, and the offloading of hormones. So again, as a double pump, we consider it to be a cyclic event that happens. So the pulmonary circuit we consider would be under very low pressure because it's only going from the heart into the lungs, and they're very lateral to each other, very close in association with each other. Where the systemic circuit is very high pressure because you're having to supply that oxygenated blood, the red blood, to every area of the body where you have living tissue. So that's the very top of the head where you have follicles within the hair follicles, you have living cells, and all the way down to your toes where you have cells that are living that need the nutrients and the oxygen. Now if we analyze some of the major functions of the heart, we've already said it acts like a double pump. You had the systemic side delivering the oxygen to the tissues, and the pulmonary side, the blue side, that is delivering the deoxygenated blood to the lungs to pick up oxygen. Because of all that's involved with the heart, the blood, the vessels, it's going to help maintain a large majority of our homeostasis and our homeostatic condition. So not only the pressure of the blood, which is the blood pressure that exerted on the vessel walls, but also the rate and the force of the contraction of the heart are going to influence the blood pressure and also the blood perfusion to the organs of the body. So the rate, the flow, and the perfusion of the oxygenated blood to the living organs all throughout the body. We also know that it acts as an endocrine organ because of ANP. Atrial natriuretic peptide lowers blood pressure by causing sodium to be retained in the kidneys, therefore reducing then, of course, with osmosis of the water, the reabsorption and the volume, so that pressure in the blood vessels begins to drop. So if you're getting rid of the sodium under the control of atrial natriuretic peptide, that should allow water to follow the sodium in the urine, and that should lower the blood plasma volume, so that should lower blood pressure. So in this section we did an introduction to the heart. We defined the area of the mediastinum, so directly behind the sternum, and we'll get into much closer detail of the mediastinum where we actually look and see and analyze the pericardium and the pericardial sac. If we define veins and arteries, we said by strict definition veins carry blood to the heart and arteries carry blood away from the heart. Well, here with the pulmonary and systemic circuit, so remember, as a dual pump, you have the pulmonary or blue side, which is the right side of the heart, and the systemic or the red side. So the exception to arteries and veins would be the pulmonary arteries and the pulmonary veins. Pulmonary arteries are the only arteries that carry deoxygenated blood, where pulmonary veins are the only veins that carry deoxygenated, I'm sorry, I said that wrong, I think. Backtrack. The pulmonary arteries are the only arteries that carry deoxygenated blood. The pulmonary veins are the only veins that carry oxygenated blood within the pulmonary and systemic circuits. And then the primary functions of the heart, of course, to act as a dual pump to deliver the oxygen out to the tissues and to receive the waste products and the carbon dioxide, deliver it back to the lungs, back to the other organs so that it can be excreted from the body. As an endocrine organ with atrial natriuretic peptide, when that's released from the cells within the heart, it's going to lower blood pressure by causing the kidneys to excrete sodium, and we know water follows the sodium passively. So if we lose more water from the blood volume within the vessels, that should drop or lower blood pressure. So it's a very much, or it is very much concerned with homeostasis.